Create a dummy project for testing the addressable remote functionality. Okay, it's a 2D project. Let's create some folders to place the sprites, scripts, and the prefabs. Now let's import the number sprites which we can use to display on the screen. Take prefab for each of the sprites. Okay, let's import the addressables package. Okay, let's create an empty game object on which we'll place our script, and this script will handle the loading and displaying of the prefabs. Okay, import the Unity engine addressable assets. Create a public variable for asset reference. This will hold reference to our addressable prefab. It can be a local or a remote prefab. Uh, and then we'll just create a dummy placeholder method which will display this asset on the screen. And now let's convert all our prefabs to addressable assets. So you open the addressable window. Okay, just dock it up there. Okay, then select the first prefab, mark it as addressable by clicking on the checkbox, and let's name it number 1. And same for the other 4 prefabs. Notice all the prefabs are now available in the default local group in the addressables window. Okay, so in our script now we can set the local number reference to number 1 and then open the script and add code to display this prefab on the screen. Let's run the program and we can see the number 1 being displayed on the screen. So our local prefabs are working as addressable assets. Now let's create a new group, and what we'll do is we'll separate the local prefabs and remote prefabs. So number 1 will remain as a local prefab and we'll put all the other numbers in a remote prefab group which will host on a remote CDN. So we created my remote content group in the addressables window. You drag drop all the prefabs there. Okay, now we need is a remote CDN location. So what we'll do is we'll go to Amazon S3. I already have an account there, so you go to Amazon S3, login for it, and then you create a separate bucket for our prefabs. So just give it a canonical name for your bucket. I'm keeping all the default options for now. And I uncheck the block all public access because we need to make it read write for everything right now. And you create the bucket. Okay, then let's just create a logical folder called version 1 under this bucket. It's not mandatory, but let's just create a version specific folder in here. Okay, we have the version 1 folder under our bucket. Now what we'll do is we'll just add a test file in this folder so we can get the complete URL to this bucket and this folder, which we'll need to configure in Unity. Okay, so I added test.png file. And just copy the object URL for this file and get rid of the file name and the last backslash character. Okay, so back in Unity, click on profile and inspect profile settings. Right now we have the default profile, but we will create a development profile for us. Profiles are just, basically different settings for, let's say, development, production, QA, or if you wanna create a separate profile for different environments, for iOS, Android, you can use that. So we created a development profile, and in the remote load path, we will paste the CDN location which we just copied. So eventually it should look like this. So we have the CDN location, and at the end we have the build target. Uh, so this is how our profile settings look for remote load path. Okay, just change the profile to development in the addressables window. You can switch back and forth to see if your settings are indeed there. So in default we have the default settings, but in development we have our remote CDN settings. Okay, now for our remote prefabs we need to create a label. uh, Label is like a way of grouping variations of same kind of prefab. So let's say you have 5 types of enemy, and if you want to query for all enemy using a single label, you can use the labels for that purpose. So we will create a label for our numbers using this labels tab. So let's create a label my remote numbers. Okay, let's now assign this label to all our remote prefabs. Okay, now let's click on build and build for content. So it will build the player scripts, and it should create a bin file in the addressable asset data. This won't create the bundle, it will just create the bin file. So we see the OSX folder was created. On that checkbox called build remote catalog, uh, and make sure the remote catalog build path is set to remote build path and load path is set to remote load path, and the path shows the Amazon CDN location, and then again build player content. Okay, so now if you see in your project directory, there is a server data file created, folder created, and it will have the catalog files and the bundle. Now we don't see any bundle file in here, so we must have made some mistake in our settings. So let's take a look which setting needs to be updated. So if you go to remote content group, uh, and in the inspector you have to make sure the build path and load path is set to the remote path, not the local one. Okay, and then you again click on build player content, and now the bundle should have been created in our server data folder. put these three files in the CDN folder. So we go to Amazon S3, we drag drop these files and put it in the folder. Now I made a mistake that I didn't select the standalone OSX folder, so this will give us error, but we'll fix it in next few minutes. So you add these files and you mark all of them public, so everybody has read-write access to it. Change the local number asset reference to a remote prefab, say number 3, and then we create a build. Okay, now in the build we see an error because it cannot find the URL, and that is because we didn't put the files correctly. We also had to put the folder uh, along with the three files. So let's fix that. So select the folder and put it in the CDN, and make sure everything is public so everybody can read it. Okay, so now back to Unity, we create a build again, and hopefully this time we should see our remote prefab being displayed on the screen. And yes, we see our remote prefab being loaded. Now what we'll do is we'll show all our remote numbers by fetching them via the label reference instead of a direct asset reference. Okay, so we'll update our script so it fetches all the remote prefabs via the label and shows them one by one. Okay, so we declare a public asset label reference where we can specify which label we want to fetch from the remote CDN. And then addressables.load resource location async will load all the resource locations. And once we have the locations for the remote prefabs for that particular label, we will spawn these numbers. And this spawn remote numbers is just a basic coroutine which takes the location and instantiates that prefab after a delay of 1 second. Okay, so now we have the script in place. Let's create the build again, and we don't have to do anything to the CDN part. The prefabs are already there. So let's see how the build output looks. Make sure to select the label in the inspector. and we can see the remote prefabs shown one by one. Okay, now what we'll do is we will add a few more numbers to our remote prefab, and without changing the build we should be able to see these new numbers in our screen. So that is the beauty of the addressable assets, that once if your scripts don't change and if only your remote content changes, we don't need new build, it will just fetch the new content. So I have added two more numbers and made them as prefabs, number 6 and number 7, and they all will be in the my remote content group. Click on build for content update because we are updating the content, and now you have to find the bin file that was created. It should be in the OSX folder. Select the bin file and the new content build will be processed. Okay, so now if you go in your server data, you will see two new catalog files and one new bundle file. So this is the updates. We have to put these three files in the same location as our previous bundle. Select these new three files which were created and upload them to our CDN location. Make sure you make them all public so everybody has read-write access to it. Okay, now we don't have to create a new build because we didn't change any script, so we'll just run our previous build and we should see the new content. So we see 1, we see 3, 5, 4, 2, 6 and 7. So we see 6, 7, the new prefabs we added. So the unit is fetching the new remote prefabs after content update on its own without requiring a build update.